A warm welcome to all of you. I'm delighted to have you joining this conversation about reinforcing multilateralism, the United Nations at 75. We are so lucky to have Ambassador Christoph Heusgen, Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations, with us to explore this important topic. This event is the first in a series on cooperating in a post-pandemic world, perspectives from Germany, which features experts from Germany discussing Germany's role in galvanizing international responses to common challenges. The series is part of the Wunderbar Together USA 2020 campaign, an initiative funded by the German Foreign Office and implemented by the Goethe Institute. I can't imagine a better person to launch this new series with me than Ambassador Heusgen. We have worked closely together in the past, and I have tremendous respect for his policy smarts and for his diplomatic finesse. Ambassador Heusgen started his current assignment at the UN in July of 2017. And with Germany's role as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, his job has only gotten more interesting. Prior to arriving in New York, he served as Chancellor Merkel's Foreign and Security Policy Advisor for 12 years, and before that, as Director of then EU High Representative Javier Solana's Policy Unit. I'm going to ask a few questions of Ambassador Heusgen, and then I'm going to open up the discussion to all of you. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom to pose your questions, and I will do my very best to incorporate as many of them as possible. The conversation will be on the record, so feel free to tweet using the hashtag #WunderbarTogether. And with that, let me turn to you, Ambassador Heusgen. Christoph, the United Nations is 75 years old. This year's General Assembly hasn't actually felt like a celebration that such an anniversary might suggest. For one, you're having an unprecedented virtual assembly. The impact of the coronavirus pandemic is obvious in that respect and in so many others. We're also seeing rising nationalism around the world. Can you share with us what your takeaways are from the speeches and interactions over the past week at the UN General Assembly? Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Karen. It's wonderful to see you, and it's wonderful to do something jointly, our conversation today, which is on the record, but you remember that even when we had off the record conversation that later found the way into newspapers. So it's very happy. I'm very happy to be with you again here. Yes, it feels very special. And by the way, the so-called UN High Level Week isn't over yet. We still haven't heard all the speeches, all the videos. There is one more day tomorrow, and tomorrow the German Foreign Minister will speak in the General Assembly, that is, have his video then displayed. No, it is of course very, very special. We all know this all over the world that COVID-19 has made it much more difficult to have in-person meetings. On this, we believe that in-person meetings are very important. Of course, we have to pay tribute to the COVID-19 and all the consequences. But with all the precautions, we were able, when we had the chair of the Security Council in July, to bring the Security Council on a couple of occasions back to the UN building, because we believe that diplomacy is a lot about talking in person and meeting in person and trying to bridge gaps that we have. And this is coming to the General Assembly, of course, the big disadvantage. We don't have the opportunity, as we always have here in New York, when the General Assembly is in session, to have this, let me call it this circus where everybody meets everybody, and on the margins you can have meetings that maybe otherwise you couldn't. You could meet people that otherwise would, make a big fuss. And what you can do is then trying, as I said, to bridge gaps. So this is not possible. What is good, nevertheless, is to at least have this virtual General Assembly, have all the speeches on display. And when you look around in the newspapers, in the media, you find reports about it, and you find reports it over several days, so it doesn't pass unnoticed. On substance, I must say the balance is mixed. You have many speeches that underline the importance of multilateralism, the importance of the role of the UN. You know that the day before the General Assembly started, we had a special event on 75 years of the United Nations. There again, most of the speeches were so favorable of the UN. The general tendency was to say, well, if the UN weren't there, we needed to create it. But of course, and this is what you allude to in your introductory statement, there were many statements that were very critical, that were very populistic, that were very nationalistic and were very confrontational. And to see that on the margins of this week, where we celebrate 75 years of the UN and what the UN has achieved in preventing a third world war, that at the same time you have flare-up of an old conflict, and you have Armenia, Azerbaijan now in a, what has been, some have even said, a war. This, of course, is something very negative. So over back to you, Karen.
So, Christoph, one of the striking things about Germany's role at the UN right now, of course, is that you are currently a non-permanent member of the Security Council. And when people talk about the UN, you have some analysts who point to the Security Council as the crucial innovation of the UN, because it's a forum where the major powers can air their differences without going to war. You have other analysts who are critical of the Security Council, saying, my goodness, it's still in 2020 has 5 permanent veto-yielding members, the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK, which really reflects the world that existed in 1945. And I, of course, listened with interest to Chancellor Merkel's remarks last week about the need for reform. And she talked about the fact that the Security Council is too often blocked when clear decisions are needed. And she spoke out in favor of expanding the Security Council. I think there's an agreement that reform is critical, but that reform seems elusive. What is the way forward?
Yes, the Chancellor put that into her brief remarks, and is a central demand, which the basis for this demand, of course, is that Germany deeply believes in multilateralism. She started her speech by pointing to the Holocaust and what Germany has done to the world until 1945. And then the conclusion of our history is that we want to resolve problems the multilateral way, to have a peaceful means of conflict management. And there, the UN is key and the Security Council is key. And therefore, the desire of Germany to have the Security Council reformed so that it does reflect the realities of the 21st century. And we are not there yet. We have been trying very hard. And Germany, together with other countries, we are pushing for this, because we believe that the longer the Security Council remains unreformed, the credibility, the legitimacy of the Security Council is going to go down. And therefore we need this. We need to have the African continent that is until now not represented among the permanent members. We have Latin America not there represented. We have countries like India and Japan not there, and Germany. Our claim also has to do with the fact that Germany is, until today, the second largest contributor, financial contributor to the overall UN system, and our contribution to the UN is such that we say, I think we claim also to be member of the Security Council. What we need is to start real negotiations. And until now, there have been a minority, but a very strong minority blocking any progress, blocking even progress to something that if you ask the famous people on the street, wouldn't believe, that we don't have a text-based negotiation, that we have a text where there are different alternatives, more permanent ones, more non-permanent ones, veto right, non-veto right, all this. You could put this in an option paper, but even this is blocked. And I must say, even if this is now an open discussion, unfortunately, China is the country that is most blocking this.
And what are your thoughts on the key to unlocking this? How would one move China on this? Or are there any things that make you hopeful that one could make progress here?
Well, I think we have to take, when you listen to the speeches, when you listen to the speech of President Xi, who was very much in favor of multilateralism, to just take him by his word and ask China to actually move forward on this and go into the direction of text-based negotiations. This is what we are trying to do. Every year we start a new process, the so-called intergovernmental negotiations, where you try to move forward. And there we would, now with the new president of the General Assembly, we now hope for a new impetus for maybe new dynamics there. We have a very experienced new president of the General Assembly, and we hope that there will be some dynamics installed into this process, and we will push for it.
And China is playing a very interesting role in general at the UN. It looks, at least from the outside, that China has really seized the mantle of multilateralism, enthusiastically stepping up and collecting leadership positions in UN agencies, Xi making the pledge that China will be carbon neutral by 2060. And I'm curious, from where you sit, how do you think this growing Chinese influence will change the United Nations and will change the nature of multilateralism?
Well, first of all, I think it is very important to recognize the enormous progress that China has made. When you look at the number of people that China was able to lead out of poverty into families and people who now can live middle-class life. This is fantastic. And therefore that China plays a more important role is only natural. And we want China to engage. What the discussion here is about what UN we want. And there we insist as Germany and others that the UN we want is the UN based on the Charter, is based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that we defend the values that the UN is founded on. And there, I must say, in the 2 years that I was now almost in the Security Council, it was not always very convincing what came from our Chinese partners. And when we had the presidency in July, we were faced with a situation where Russia and China was actively blocking and even putting a veto on a resolution which would have allowed more UN crossing point into the north of Syria, to allow humanitarian aid to get to the people in need. So this was something which I found very disturbing, and I think we have to really make clear for China and for the UN in general that we must not change the basis. We must not go away from where the founding mothers and fathers of the UN, where they established the United Nations with the Charter, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Roosevelt, your country woman, really made a big impact on, and we want this to continue.
So when we think about the role that particular countries are playing at the UN, Germany's role is important, China's role is important, but we also have the role of the US. And when I, as an American, think about what we've seen the UN do since its creation, transatlantic partnership has been at the core of multilateral cooperation. Typically, it's been Americans and Europeans working together. And I was struck when I was looking at President Trump's remarks last week, and I just wanted to quote one piece of it. He said, "For decades, the same tired voices proposed the same failed solutions, pursuing global ambitions at the expense of their own people. But only when you take care of your own citizens will you find a true basis for cooperation. As president, I have rejected the failed approaches of the past, and I am proudly putting America first, just as you should be putting your countries first." Talk also about how this approach of the Trump administration with America first is changing the dynamic at the United Nations.
Yes, we of course listened very carefully to the speech, but before I respond to your question on the speech, let me go back to the logic or to the foundation of German foreign policy. After what Germany did to the rest of the world, did to Europe, the founding fathers of the Federal Republic of Germany, under the very strong influence of our American, British, and French friends, said never again. Our constitution was set after being approved by our Western allies. And what is at the core? At the core is that you don't do it alone, but you integrate. And the wonderful experience of Europe since 1945 is the fact that we have the European Union, that we have a rules-based order in the European Union. And instead of with France in 75 years, since 1870 until 1945, we had 3 major wars. In the 75 years after 1945, we have a perfect friendship. And if in the European Union we have a difference, we don't go to war, but we go to Strasbourg, to the European Court of Justice. And this is what I think made Europe really great. It's not that you put your country first. Of course you put your country first, but you put your country first also thinking about your neighbors and thinking that it's in your interest, that you can only thrive when your neighbor is also in a good situation. So we believe that multilateralism, a rules-based order, which has brought the longest period of peace and prosperity to Europe, is also something that we believe is the right thing to try to achieve on a worldwide basis. And the United Nations is built on the same foundation as the European Union, to say that we don't want to resolve conflicts by force, but we want to discuss it in the UN. This is why we need the Security Council, and we should try to then go by the rules. And this is something that we are continue to fight for, and this is also something that we impress and try to impress on our American friends. To now come to a concrete example, we have the United States not only leaving the International Criminal Court, but also trying to persecute and trying to sanction the members of the court as a prosecutor general. And I tell you that it personally hurts, because what made international justice where we have come so far was the United States. It was the Nuremberg trials, the first international criminal court, and an example. There's still one of the judges still alive, and it's something wonderful that the US has. And now to have my American friends actually fight the International Criminal Court, or leave the Human Rights Council, or then also just ignore legally binding Security Council resolution. This is something that hurts.
So I'm going to pull in a question from one of our listeners, because it follows so perfectly from the conversation we've been having. And this is from Michael Schaefer. And he said, he's postulating that China and the US are the biggest stumbling blocks to reform. And he said, this would give the European Union a special responsibility to be an architect of a renovated global order. And I should point out, Germany currently holds the presidency of the European Union. So he said, despite all of the difficulties to produce political will in general, do you see sufficient congruence among Europeans to push this reform process together?
Well, first of all, in an ideal world with a different charter, we would say the European Union should be a member of the Security Council. But the charter doesn't allow for it. The charter only allows for individual countries. So to have the European Union as member of Security Council is something that is unrealistic. But what we have to do and what we are doing here in New York, and I can only speak from New York, is have a very close cooperation between the EU member states in the Council and between the European Union members, all of them, in relation to the Security Council. We, the members, the European members in the Security Council, and we are right now 4. Before Britain left, we were 5. We are 4 members. We work very closely together. We do joint press stakeouts. We brief the other 23 every Tuesday morning. We have a member of the European Union office also following directly the Security Council, reporting about it. So we work very, very closely together, and I think we have to try to have to try to do this and continue to do this. There are so many other aspects in the United Nations outside the Security Council. When it comes to the General Assemblies, when it comes to the different committees, where today the European Union member states are represented by the office of the European Union, the representative of the European External Action Service. So we are making progress here, more progress than sometimes people believe we make.
Mm-hmm. So let's now take a very specific case to look at in terms of how the UN can be effective. And certainly many world leaders see the coronavirus pandemic as an example that highlights both our interdependence, but also the need for an international solution. And I was struck that Chancellor Merkel pointed to the pandemic as an example of a problem that crosses national borders and requires communication and cooperation at all levels in her comments last week. Now, President Trump, in his remarks, of course, argued that we should hold accountable the nation which unleashed this plague onto the world, to use his words, namely China. The US, of course, also has said it will leave the World Health Organization. From where you sit, do you see a means for the United Nations to be a force for good in putting forward or forging a multilateral solution to the coronavirus pandemic?
Karen, there is no doubt there is no way you can resolve this issue nationally. And to my knowledge, there is no other country that has said that they would leave the World Health Organization. Everybody else, or at least all the major players and donors, believe that the World Health Organization is the only one that can actually try to combat this on a global level. There is no way you can fight this individually. So we very much regret this, that the US is so critical about the World Health Organization and leaves the organization. Of course, the organization needs to be reformed, and they are already made progress at WHO. You remember the Ebola crisis, and World Health Organization had to adapt. The Chancellor was very much engaged on this, went to Geneva, talked to the executive director there, and we have to strengthen it. But of course it needs to be reformed, and to see where there were mistakes, and maybe in the first instance there were mistakes committed, but to throw out the baby with the bath is not the solution. And on the other hand, to be also very clear here, to when I listen to our Chinese friends, when they present themselves as the ones who coped with the problem and did everything fantastic, and they resolved it, I remind also our Chinese friends that at the beginning they committed mistakes. They silenced somebody like Dr. Li Wenliang, who very early on said that there is a problem and we have to do something, and the doctor was silent. So there's also things that went wrong. But again, this is not the time of going, your own way. You have to do it together. The only possibility.
Christoph, one of our listeners is interested in another specific case, and this is someone with Radio Free Asia who is asking, as the chair of the UN Security Council Sanctions Committee on North Korea, how would you assess multilateral cooperation on sanctions implementation on North Korea? What's the role of Germany in galvanizing a more unified voice on DPRK sanctions at the UN?
Yes, I'm very grateful for this question. When we assumed our membership in the Security Council, we were asked as Germany to take over the chair of the Sanctions Committee of North Korea. And there, I must say, with regard to North Korea, our American friends were very much forthcoming, very much in favor. And when it comes to multilateralism and the rules-based order, I'm very happy that our US friends are very much pushing for the agreements that we have achieved on with regard to resolutions, sanctions resolution, where all 15 countries agree to that they are implemented. I just wish our American friends would be as forthcoming when it comes to other resolutions that have been adopted in the Security Council. Back to North Korea, we work as the chair of the Sanctions Committee. These are complicated bodies. You have the members, you have a panel of experts. The panel of experts brings reports about what is going on and where sanctions are not implemented and rules are not followed. And then in the Sanctions Committee, as a chair, you try to get everybody on board. Now, over in general, it works out. What for us is very important in parentheses is that we have the humanitarian exceptions working, that the humanitarian help to North Korea is not stopped by these sanctions, and that works, at least in the Sanctions Committee. But you have to do, and this is what we do, to try to really have everybody in the membership follow by the rules, by the sanctions. We explain to the members of the Security Council, but we also explain to other members of the UN what it needs to implement these sanctions. So these sanctions committees are important, and also Germany, if I may, leads another sanctions committee. And that is more complicated and more challenging. And this is the Sanctions Committee on Libya, where we have very clear sanctions. And this is binding international law, which, for instance, does not allow for weapons or mercenary to be sent into Libya. And there we find, unfortunately, that some countries even don't hide that they are violating international law, like the Emiratis or Turkey or Russia, and this is clearly in the report, and this is public news, and this is again something very, very negative, and there we have to really insist on international law to be implemented.
That is a perfect segue to a question that's come in from Vladimir Handel, who's in Prague, and he is asking, can you please comment on the role of Russia in the Security Council? What are the chances of cooperation with Russia on issues such as Syria, Ukraine, or Libya, as you just mentioned? So could you speak specifically to that?
Yes, first of all, to say that I have a very good personal relationship with the Russian ambassador, who's a very able diplomat. But on substance, I must say it is difficult. Earlier in our conversation, I quoted the July Security Council meeting where we are the so-called pen holders for the humanitarian situation in Syria, tried to achieve for the population in the north of Syria that they get unhindered access to humanitarian aid. And Russia and China, against 13 other countries, Russia and China blocked it and vetoed this, which was, I think, a very heartbreaking decision taken by Russia. Russia is a difficult partner. We tried in the Security Council to promote, for instance, the topic of climate change and security, and Russia didn't like that, and didn't allow us to make progress there. And then coming to the issue of Syria, Syria is a nightmare. Syria, not only for the humanitarian situation, the overall situation in the country is terrible. When you follow now the court proceedings in Koblenz in Germany, where for the first time in Germany we have now two Assad officials facing trial there, and the witnesses tell about the situation in the prisons, about the mass graves. And I present this in the Security Council, but there is no willingness to really cooperate and put pressure on Syria. So this is on the Syrian government. This is a difficult file, and you find in many instances. I mentioned Libya. The fact that the Wagner group is deploying mercenaries there, it's very difficult to have with Russia in the many conflicts that we face to work together. But there is no alternative. We tried again and again. We tried to see, can we find common ground? And there are areas, for instance, on the crisis in Yemen, I think with my Russian colleague, we go into the same direction. So there are issues where, but as I said, there is no alternative. We have to work with Russia. We try very hard here. And there's one thing my Russian colleague and I have in common, and that is pushing the Security Council back into the building, because we believe that you can do social distancing with 15 people, and you can go back into the UN building and then have discussions, between yourself and on the margins, so that you can achieve some progress on the many files.
So I think we're hearing that your diplomatic skills, which already were excellent, are being honed on a daily basis in your current job. We now have a question from someone at the U.S. State Department who's going to take you away from the day-to-day hardships and ask you, what would Ambassador Heusgen's ideal Security Council composition look like under a reformed UN?
Very good question. Now, because I must say our American friends are skeptical about Security Council reform, but not that they're skeptical because of Germany becoming members or African, but they are of course concerned about the efficiency of the Security Council, and this is a very relevant question. And there I would agree that when we enlarge the Security Council to make it have it more legitimacy and more really representative, we have to keep that question in mind. We must not allow for the Security Council to be even more to have more possibilities to be blocked, or there are certain initiatives that limit the veto rights that have come out of the membership, and one has to look at this. One has to look at the overall number, how many members, what is the upper limit, so that you don't become more inefficient. So this is absolutely a relevant question that the colleague in the State Department. But again, what I said was, we want a first step, and the first step is to have a text-based negotiation, that we have a text where different options are in, and there, how many numbers, how many vetoes, how many permanent, semi-permanent, some proposed, and you can have that as options, but you have to get into negotiations. And until now, unfortunately, China is blocking even this step, that we have a text-based negotiation.
So you're not going to tell us which countries you think should be part of that Reform Security Council?
Well, I said it earlier. I think that you have to have Africa more represented, but it's for the Africans to decide. I think we should have Latin America. I told you why I believe Germany should be. We are in a group together with Brazil, Japan, India, And we believe all four of them belong into the Security Council. So I become a bit more concrete, okay?
Okay. And we have another listener who's interested in Jovan Kovacic, who's asking, when you think about reform and you think about efficiency, would it ever be possible to scrap the veto power in the UN Security Council and have a binding majority vote?
Well, idealism, Mr. Kant comes from Germany, so you can always dream. I don't see under the present circumstances, and when you change the charter, everybody has to ratify. The 5 permanent members have to ratify, and my imagination doesn't go as far right now to have U.S. Congress ratify that the U.S. gives up the veto. So, but of course, vetoes. There are initiatives where they say vetoes should be limited when it comes to questions of genocide and other issues. There shouldn't be a veto and all this, and you have to think about it. But at the same time, I worked long enough, politics with relationship to parliament. You always have to see that what you decide as a government, that parliament also then is ready to accept.
So here's something that's going to take us in a more positive direction. So this is a question asking, when in January 2021, we look back at 2020, what will be the 1 or the 2 or the 3 big success stories where you can say the United Nations made a positive contribution to solving this problem?
Well, first, we have 3 more months to go. Second, what I said before, now we are sitting here, you are sitting in Washington, I'm sitting in New York, we are in the US, and we of course are confronted with the US policy of leaving the World Health Organization. I think we'll have as a takeaway at the end of this year that the overwhelming majority of member states in the United Nations say that we can only resolve the COVID pandemic together. And I take from the many speeches we hear from smaller countries, mid-sized countries, large countries, that they are committed to multilateralism. I take this as an encouraging sign. They are, of course, then overshadowed by others, also by the speech and the excerpt that you mentioned from the American president. But overall, I see a large groundswell of support for multilateralism. We have Germany, together with France, we have created the Alliance for Multilateralism. And when we launched this last year on a very short notice, we got 50 foreign ministers from one week to the next to join this. This alliance, which has some concrete issues that it looks at, but also is kind of symbolic, has an enormous support, and many cases says, yes, go ahead with this. This is also something I take away, that the majority is positive. And let me finish this with one thing. When the UN for the 75th anniversary had ordered a study, a poll that was conducted worldwide, and it came out that worldwide the support for the UN is extremely high. There are issues with what does the UN need for the concrete person and how practical the consequences are in a given situation. But overall, the UN continues to enjoy a very high popularity, and this is what I think we take away. And this is also the motivation for people like me, and there are hundreds of these people who think we have to get up every morning, fight for multilateralism, see to it that the UN, that decisions of the UN, resolution of the General Assembly, resolutions of the Security Council are actually implemented for the better of the world. And if you look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, when you look at the Paris Agreement, these are UN agreements. And I don't know how our world will be able to function and continue if these UN agreements are not actually implemented.
That's a really powerful and important point too, that there is widespread support for the UN among citizens. And Christoph, just to end on a personal reflection on your point, on your part, this is your third year in this job. It's your first virtual UNGA. And former US diplomat that you and I worked with very closely always used to say to me, oh, UNGA is like the Star Wars bar of global diplomacy, right? Everybody meets there. How much are you losing by not having leaders there in person? Just help us get a sense of how different the atmosphere is.
It is totally different. I mean, you have lived it in your previous positions. You know how it is here. I've been through many UNGAs, both as part of a delegation and then the ambassador trying to host a German delegation. And to tell you, last year with we are doing protocol logistics to have had the chancellor here last year. You met her, and we had the 4 ministers here, and then to have that here, it was just it was heartwarming. It was wonderful to have that, and then to see the all the meetings that took place, and you saw so many like-minded, and the atmosphere that was in the air was trying to promote the issues on the agenda, trying to have multilateral work. This was something really exceptional over the years. Not to have that, in the embassy, the logistics department, they love it, but it's overall it is really terrible. And I really hope that next year we'll be able to again have it in-person meeting. The one thing I find positive perhaps is that maybe we will ask with regard to the size of delegations, and there I think the US or the German delegations were not among the smallest ones, that maybe you can size down a bit, not to have it just totally blocked everything. Also for the the citizen of New York, they always to a certain degree hated UNGA because everything was blocked. If you talk to New Yorkers today, they all say, please, please, UN, come back. You saved so many jobs, and you made this city also what New York is about. So also for New Yorkers, I think they regret that they ever criticized what was going on here during September. So we need this in-person meeting. We need the UN.
Well, Christoph, having had the pleasure and privilege of having worked with you when I was previously in government, I know how lucky Germany is to have you doing this difficult diplomatic job at the UN. And I certainly agree with you that there are so many problems we face, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's the climate crisis, that call out for international cooperation. So I want to wish you the very best in this job. We are so grateful to you for taking time to help us understand what the UN at 75 means, both what the challenges are there for the UN, but also what the opportunities are. And if anyone can try to seize those opportunities, you are one of those people. So wish you the very best. To all of you listening, thank you for the terrific questions. I know I didn't get to all of them, and I do hope that you'll be able to join us for future events in this Wunderbar Together series about cooperating in a post-pandemic world. So please join me in a virtual thank you to Ambassador Heusgen, and Christoph, very best.
Well, thank you very much. It's wunderbar to do this together with you, Karen. So all the best to you, to the German Marshall Fund, and it was really fun doing it. And as always, we are pretty open when we talk about things. So thank you very much, Karen.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.